And now, last but not least, before we all ask questions, we have Ken Oplinger, who is the president and CEO of Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce. And that's really something that hasn't been mentioned yet. You're an important person with a lot of input and definitely someone who can help us see a larger picture because you know all of the people who are involved. So Ken, please come up and give us your view. Thank you.
Thanks, and good evening, everyone. I realize that I'm standing between you and time at the bar, so I will be brief so that we can get to questions. So a couple of things. I think that, from our perspective, first of all, I don't disagree with anything that my fellow panelists have said, and in fact, especially with Hal and Angel, I think we had quite a few conversations around this topic as we went through this last exercise with the elections. So I will not try and be repetitive, but maybe just sort of package this as far as what the business community sees as we look at the issues downtown. First and foremost, we've talked about some of the reasons that we find ourselves where we do today. We've talked about the changing nature of retail. Oftentimes around the country when we discuss that, we're talking about the fact that we seem to be moving away from big box stores. Well, that's something that Santa Barbara doesn't really have a lot of. I mean, we heard a question about that earlier. Why do we have to go down to the 3 different Targets within 5 miles each of each other in Ventura? Why don't we have some of these opportunities here? Well, there's positives and negatives to that. The fact that we don't have some of those issues, we don't have some of these larger stores we have to fill, there's some positives to that. But the changing nature of retail around the country, I think, really has hit all of us, and there are some ways that it's hitting Santa Barbara. That's part of why we find ourselves where we are. That growth in retail to the south, of course, has been part of it. The perception of safety and cleanliness, I like the street civility tag, that's a very good one, but that has, and I use the word perception not because I disagree, but because I want to be mindful of the fact that we have different opinions on sort of how we experience that. And so we need to be mindful of that, but there are issues there, and if nothing else, even if you disagree that it's a problem, that perception is what's keeping a lot of locals from going downtown, and we need to address it. And also the cost of locating downtown. And it's not just the issues that I think we've heard about with some folks saying, geez, the landlords just charge too much. We know in the Downtown Work survey that the finding was that given the property values, that probably isn't the case, that the lease rates are actually probably where they ought to be. What's more important, though, is not just the cost of being able to locate there, it's the cost of getting there in the first place. And let me just say that if you didn't get a chance to watch last Tuesday's City Council meeting, I think you'll see a wonderful example from a number of folks about the difficulties that we have in the city with being able to build a business here. And the years that it takes to be able to get oftentimes pretty nominal changes to a structure in order to get your business started. Things that in some communities would take a couple of months that take 2, 3, 4 years here. We have got to address this. It doesn't matter how much time and effort we as a community put into this. If people come and try and invest here and they don't have a way to be able to actually make that investment get to a point that it's producing income for them, it's sort of pointless. So as a community, I think this is part of the discussion. It's not just the vision for downtown, it's how we're going to ensure people can actually do something once we get that vision in place. In addition to this, I think that we need to acknowledge the fact that as we've gone through this last couple of years, there have been some great activities that the city government itself has stepped up and done. The investment that was made 5 years ago to try and put more police on the street. Now, they did this with the community service officers. That didn't work. They moved away from that. That's great. But if you didn't get a chance to go to the State of the City address where the mayor actually walked through this and showed a wonderful video that highlights this sort of range of different services the city is providing with different people downtown, it really is a great video. You can get it on their website. And I think the changes that they've recently made to make sure that we've got visible people on State Street during business hours all the time, there's always folks who were there with either the yellow shirts, the red shirts. I think that is starting to make a bit of a change. And so I think we should acknowledge the city has made that investment and thank them for it and hope that they continue to do that. As I look at this then, and sort of from the Chamber's perspective, here's some of the things that we see as potential solutions. I think that the city work study that downtown Santa Barbara put together is a great starting point. I think it provides us with a lot of good information. We may not agree with all of the sort of ideas that came out of that. We may have issue with some of the suggestions that the company has provided us. they've given us a starting point. They haven't given us a roadmap. I think we need to take that, the research that was done, and I think from there we can actually put together some great plans for the community. I think we need to work with commercial brokers. Whatever the solution is, it's going to be done by ensuring that we're getting the right people into these vacancies. And so part of what we have talked about with our friends at downtown Santa Barbara is the potential, and Kate sort of alluded to this, the potential to actually see if we can't look at Southern California, look at some small businesses in other parts of the southern part of the state that we like, and help them see Santa Barbara as a potential place to open a second or third location. And what we don't want to do is we don't get to the point where we're essentially telling landlords who they have to bring in. But what we can do is find these companies, help pre-qualify them, get all their paperwork together, and provide it to the commercial brokers in the community. So that as vacancies come up, they can actually take that to their owners as far as, this is a potential tenant, along with the cell phone store and the perfume store, and give them some ideas of things that we actually want in the community and help those folks come in. We talked about experiential retail. I think Angel certainly mentioned that, and he certainly comes from one of the two companies that's located here in Santa Barbara that is really a leader worldwide in experiential retail. Between Deckers and others we have here, we have an opportunity, I think, as a community to bring some of these folks to the table, to ask them to do some of the things here locally that they've done in places around the world. Wouldn't it be great if Sonos could open a little facility on State Street? You could go in and experience all the different sound systems Sonos has. Now, it's not a full retail store. It isn't even in New York. You don't really go there to buy the sound system. You go there to experience what they have, and then you can actually order it right online there. It's the same with Deckers. If you've been to the Deckers store out at their corporate offices, they don't carry every shoe that they make. But you can get every shoe they make within 24 hours at your house after you try on there and see what you want. So those sorts of things I think would be great, and I think we need to go to those companies and say, look, you're part of this community. Help us rebuild State Street and see if they'll help us by making an investment that will start to bring some of that around. Housing, we absolutely have got to find ways to be able to bring housing downtown, and for a number of reasons. It certainly plays that if you have people who are living downtown and working downtown at the same time, you've got that more 24-hour flow that means that businesses have more people that they can interact with. That's all going to be positive for the economics of the downtown. But it's also because we have got to build more housing here, folks. We have 15,000 people who work in this city and either can't afford to live here or can't find housing here. And so whether you support things like the city's AUD program, I think we absolutely have to build more housing here. And one of the few places that we seem to have unanimity of opinion on that is on State Street. So if we can look at some opportunities where we can build housing a little denser on the State Street area, I agree with Kate, you want to maintain that first floor for retail, but second, third, fourth floor residential, especially for younger folks who are already working downtown, what a great way to be able to add to our housing stock here. And so I think that's got to be part of what we look at. In closing for us, we actually sort of have a phrase we use internally when we talk about where we are. And it's that it's time for State Street 4.0. If you think about the original State Street before the earthquake, that's 1.0. What we did to rebuild State Street and build the beautiful city we have after the earthquake, that's 2.0. What happened with Hal and a lot of other leaders in this community in the 60s and 70s as we sort of moved into what we see as State Street today is 3.0. It's time to rethink it again. I absolutely agree with Hal, and I think that part of what we need to do is we need to find those leaders. I think two of them happen to be at this table up here who can make that happen. And I would say that we need to avail ourselves of the opportunity that our downtown organization is providing us right now. They've recently gone through a leadership change. They've talked about the fact that in the next 6 months they really want to find their purpose. I think this is their purpose, and I think they ought to be the ones that lead us out of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just going to make one comment, and that's that two leaders, I think, are three, because I think that, in truth, Amy is here and is a leader because, one, she's a woman, and two, more importantly, she's actually running the business in that area. So I would just like to suggest that it's not just the leaders of the past and those who have run large corporations, but those who are running small stores.